Her name was Chalpangul, born and raised right there in Kashgar. She was known for her looks, wheat-colored skin, black eyes, a delicate build. It earned her the name Nuzugum, which means delicate one.
But she was much more than that, wasn't she? The sources stress she was educated, knowledgeable.
Exactly. A talented singer, too, apparently, and possessed this quiet strength. History certainly showed that.
It did indeed. In 1826, she actually joined the uprising against Manchu oppression,
Yeah.
fighting for her homeland.
And when that rebellion failed, she was exiled, sent far away to Ilile.
Right, and that's where things took another drastic turn. A Mongol official there tried to force her into marriage, to basically break her spirit.
But Nuzugum wasn't broken. The sources say on her wedding night, she killed him.
A truly defiant act. And then she escaped, vanished into the night.
Managed to hide for 6 months, incredibly, in a place called Kumusluk. But, well, eventually the king forces found her.
Captured her. And after 3 months in prison, still defiant, she was executed by sword. That was in 1827.
Wow, what a story. It's so powerful and tragic.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that story, Nuzugum's story, it isn't just some isolated incident of courage, It's like a single thread in this much bigger picture that the sources we're looking at today help us see.
Okay.
A picture of, well, the historical place of women, how their roles changed, the value society placed on them.
Right, so let's unpack that. We've got this incredible story of defiance, sacrifice, and our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to really explore what these sources tell us about women's roles, their status across history, and what that reveals about shifting values, maybe shifting consciousness.
Exactly. Nuzugum's story feels like a very dramatic example of the kind of resilience and spirit that pops up again and again in the sources.
So where do we start to understand that resilience? Where do the sources take us first?
They take us way back to the very roots, to a time when society was structured, well, very differently.
Okay, they mention a deep reverence for mothers, going back to what they call primitive communal society. What did that actually look like?
So in those earliest times, before the class structures and states we know, the sources suggest kinship was largely matrilineal.
Matrilineal, meaning?
Meaning groups were organized around the mothers. Your family line, your place in the community, it was traced through your mother's side.
So it wasn't just about respect, it was like the fundamental organizing principle.
Precisely. The sources indicate women often held dominant roles in the clan or tribe. They even led productive activities.
Huh.
And you see traces of this in customs, too. Like, after marriage, it was apparently common for the man to move into the woman's household, become part of her family unit.
That's a huge contrast to later patriarchal structures we're more familiar with. What was the thinking behind it, the core belief?
The sources describe this really powerful spiritual view. Women were seen as the actual creators of humanity, like capable of bringing existence from non-existence.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't just symbolic. These early peoples viewed women as, well, almost all-powerful beings who could literally determine fate.
So a deep spiritual and philosophical view placing women right at the center. But, okay, things change. History moves on. The sources acknowledge that shift, right?
Oh, definitely. They talk about the gradual formation of class society, the rise of state power. And with that, authority started shifting towards men. Patrilineal systems tracing lineage through the father became the norm.
And the state often cemented that.
Yes, state structures often formalized and legitimized male dominance.
So the formal power shifts. But did that original feeling, that reverence, that compassion for women, did it just disappear overnight?
Well, that's what's really interesting. The sources emphasize that even with this massive shift in power and structure, those feelings of respect for mothers, compassion for women, they didn't just vanish. They continued to be important, like in the collective mind. And the sources kind of frame the modern push for women's rights as building on these layers, seeing it as a necessary part of social progress today.
It really underscores how women's status isn't static, is it? It's tied up with cultural development, social consciousness, all the things the sources discuss.
Exactly. They show how things like cultural exchange, developments in how people produce things, changing ideas, they all shape that social consciousness. And this process creates, a distinct cultural identity, a way of thinking, a value system.
And ideas about women's liberation, appreciating women, these were part of that evolving picture.
Yes, the sources present them not as brand new ideas, but as concepts that have kind of always been there, developing and changing throughout history, influenced by these bigger currents.
Okay, let's move from those deep roots to another specific historical context the sources mention, shamanism. Among early Uyghurs, especially north of the Great Wall, what role did women play there?
Right? Shamanism was central back then, and the sources make a really striking point. Shamans, these holy figures who communicated with the spirit world, they were chosen from both men and women, equally.
Equally.
Yes, and get this, in some tribes, the sources state that all the shamans were women.
All of them. Wow. That points to significant spiritual authority for women. What did these shamans do?
They were the intermediaries, basically,
Bah.
connecting with ancestors, driving out evil spirits, protecting people from disasters. They weren't just spiritual guides. They led important ceremonies, weddings, funerals, rituals during crises like famine or disease,
And how were they regarded by society?
with deep respect. The sources stress this respect from everyone, from ordinary folks right up to the rulers, the khans, and they specifically note this respect was especially strong for female shamans.
So a really vital, respected role for women at the spiritual heart of their society. Did this respect carry over when religious beliefs changed, like when Manichaeism was adopted?
The sources suggest it didn't just disappear. They offer a really concrete example from tribes in the Orkhon Basin.
Oh.
Yeah, a custom where sons, upon entering the home, would bow to their mothers before they bowed to their fathers.
Before the father. Interesting.
Very. And the sources say this custom actually continued into much later periods. It shows how ingrained that respect for the mother figure was.
And we see this reflected right at the top too, don't we? In the Orkhon Uyghur Khaganate, looking at official monuments.
Absolutely. The sources point to things like the Moyunsor stele, erected around 750 AD. These big official inscriptions often mention the Kagan, the king, and the Khatun, the queen, right next to each other.
Side by side. And it wasn't just ceremonial listing, was it? It described their roles.
Exactly. That Moyunsor stele specifically says, and this is a quote essentially, that the Kagan and Khatun were jointly recognized as the rulers.
Jointly recognized.
Yeah, it suggests equal status in running the state, not just a queen consort, but a co-ruler. That's a pretty powerful statement about women's political standing back then.
Beyond the rulers, the sources also talk about customs protecting women more generally, structuring family life during that Orkhon period.
They do. They reveal certain legal customs that really show respect and protection for wives and daughters.
Mm.
For instance, they mention a death sentence for any man who offended a married woman.
A death sentence. Seriously, regardless of his status.
Apparently so, regardless of his rank. It shows how incredibly seriously they took protecting a married woman's dignity.
That's a very strong legal protection. What else?
Another custom mentioned? If a man dishonored an unmarried girl, he was required to marry her. And also, thinking about nomadic life where community support was crucial, there was a practice where a widow would marry her deceased husband's brother or another close male relative.
To keep her within the clan's protection.
Exactly. It wasn't necessarily about romance, more about ensuring she and any children remained supported within the existing social structure.
Makes sense in that context. And these clan structures, did they fade away when people settled down?
The sources suggest that even when people shifted more towards agriculture and towns, these deep-rooted clan structures and some of these customs often persisted. Shows how enduring those social safety nets were considered, especially for women.
Now, the sources don't just paint women in these domestic or ceremonial or even political roles. They also emphasize their role in work, right? In the economy.
Absolutely. Whether it was nomadic herding out on the steppes or settled farming and gardening in the oases of Xinjiang, the picture painted is of women working right alongside men in production.
Active participants.
Very much so. The sources talk about their creativity, their determination in facing tough environments and challenges.
And how did this active role, maybe the hardships too, shape their character according to these texts?
Well, the sources suggest these experiences fostered qualities like diligence, bravery, assertiveness, and a certain independence in how they dealt with others. They weren't depicted as passive or fragile. They were active contributors with strong characters formed by life's demands.
And speaking of strong characters, the sources highlight some really notable women from later history, figures whose legacies are still felt.
Yes, they bring several key figures into focus, like the mother of Mahmud al-Kashgari, the famous scholar.
Right.
Even though she apparently came from a lower social class, she's described as well-read, intelligent. She taught her son at home, nurtured his literacy. And she even advised her husband, who was a Khan, apparently earning respect throughout the royal household.
So influence through intellect, education, cutting across class lines. Who else?
There's Turkan Khatun from the 11th century. She married into the Seljuk court from the Karakhanid dynasty. The sources credit her with significantly influencing her husband, Sultan Malik Shah, using her knowledge and wisdom. She actively participated in governance.
Another example of high-level political influence. And then there's Amanisa Khan, maybe more of a cultural figure.
A hugely important cultural figure, daughter of a woodcutter, the sources say, but she became highly educated, cultured, involved in literature and the arts. She became the consort of Abdurshid Khan, ruler of the Saidiya Khanate.
And her major contribution.
Her radiant talent, as the sources put it, was key in compiling and refining the 12 muqams, that huge body of Uyghur classical music, a direct link to preserving and shaping core cultural heritage.
That's incredible. And the sources kind of connect these women, don't they? Including Nuzagum, who we started with.
Yes, they place Emanisa Khan in a line with others who left their mark, from Kashgar all the way to Ili. They mention these 7 brave girls of Molyur Mountain, someone named Moyim Khan, who died fighting Manchu oppression, Rizwangal from the Three Districts Revolution. And they bring Nuzugum back here too.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, presenting her as part of this continuum, this lineage of brave, significant women who shaped their times.
This history of powerful women and respect, it's also reflected in literature, isn't it?
It is. The sources mention that classical literary epics often focus on women who are beautiful, yes, but also faithful. Their noble spirits are celebrated, especially their devotion to true love and to freedom. So these ideals were being passed down through stories.
Okay, so we've seen ancient structures, spiritual roles, legal codes, political power, economic roles, these amazing historical figures, literary ideals. Quite a picture. The sources seem to frame love, care, respect for mothers, sisters, daughters as these really enduring values.
They do. They present them as sort of fundamental, positive aspects of human nature,
Mm-hmm.
crucial for balance in relationships, like a life-giving force in society.
But there's a but, isn't there? They also acknowledge these positive things, these bright elements, can sometimes fade, dim.
Yes, this is a really crucial point they make. The argument in the sources is that things like ignorance, superstition, a lack of knowledge, these can cause people to drift away from their, let's say, inherent kindness.
Okay.
And this can lead to what they call a primitive mindset, where the strong, often meaning men in this context, might start to degrade or devalue the weak, meaning women.
So if ignorance is the problem, what's the solution according to these sources? How do you counter that decline?
The answer is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Continuous learning, intellectual enrichment, that's what they say, can illuminate their inner world.
Right.
And through that process, through gaining knowledge, people, men and women, come to this really vital understanding that without women, life loses its core meaning and essence.
That's a profound realization. And the sources link that to women being a vital force.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The sources put forward this idea that women are a vital force shaping the destiny of a nation, and that this idea is something that enlightened people increasingly reflect on. And they connect it to something very practical, something observed over time.
Mm-hmm.
Educated, culturally aware, mothers are simply more effective at raising children, which leads to more capable, more responsible future generations.
So it's not just about individual enlightenment, it's about the collective future, the nation's well-being.
That's the link they make. Understanding this truth about educated mothers helps develop a sense of responsibility for the future of the people, the nation.
And the ultimate conclusion they draw from all this history, all this reflection, what's the final thought?
They conclude that when this sense of responsibility stops being just a thought and becomes conscious action, women actively participating in shaping that future, then that figure of the great mother, the one seen historically as creator of humanity and nation, truly earns the love and respect she's due.
It kind of brings that ancient reverence full circle, doesn't it? But grounded now in conscious understanding and action.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has taken us on quite a journey through these sources. From ancient matrilineal roots and female shamans, through legal protections, powerful queens, working women, inspiring figures like Amanisa Khan and Nuzugum, right up to this modern idea of women as crucial for a nation's destiny.
And also that crucial warning about how ignorance can undermine all that respect.
Yeah, that contrast is stark. It shows enduring values, but also how fragile they might be. What really stands out to you listening back to all this? How does this historical perspective connect with, conversations we have today about women's roles?
For me, it's that deep-rootedness. The respect wasn't always just granted. Sometimes it was inherent in the structure of society or religion,
Mm-hmm.
but also Yeah, how vulnerable it is to ignorance or shifts in power. It makes you think about what sustains respect.
It really does. And it leaves us with a pretty pointed thought, doesn't it? If these sources are right, if knowledge and education are so fundamental, not just for respecting women, but for empowering them as this vital force for people's future, well, what does that imply about the absolute importance of universal education for the health and progress of any society? Definitely something to chew on.